Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, or whatever time zone it is whether you in the world. It is your Lore Saviour, and today we are going to be talking about Pendragon 6th edition, which confusingly is the 7th iteration of this 40-something-year-old game. You got first, they skipped 2nd edition, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 5.1, 5.2, and 6th edition right here. Yeah, I know it's not the usual horror-related stuff they usually do, but I've had this for a while and I've wanted a ramble and waffle about this for some time, so that's exactly what I'm going to be doing right here. So there's no script, there's no real plan or structure with any of this, so if this seems a bit waffly and rambly, it exactly is that. So hopefully this will be enjoyable, hopefully you'll get some idea what Pendragon is and you may want to give it a go yourself, but ultimately I think this is a very enjoyable, unique gaming experience, but I think this edition right here, at present, on the 13th of December 2024, in the year of our Lord Telos, is flawed and incomplete. But before I get too involved with that, what is Pendragon? Pendragon was published by Chaosium and it was written by the late Greg Stafford. He actually died during this game's development and this game was delayed significantly because of it. I don't know the ins and outs of it, so I'm not going to waffle on much more about that. And the whole purpose of Pendragon, in case the artwork and the title didn't give it away, you take on the role of Arthurian knights through Arthurian legends in Britain. And you can basically pick a year or date of whatever within that timeline and do, you know, whatever it is that the game's master wants you to do. But the default manner of play is that you play through year by year through the Arthurian legend. Like one session, it equates to 1 year of play, and there are different seasonal cycles where you, the player, can go and do sort of different things, like the conquest of lands and territories, and slaying of monsters and other bandits and whatnot. There's the whole meeting and greeting fine ladies in courtrooms sort of things, and your character grows older and they can retire and they develop and they die, and then you end up playing their descendants and carry on with that legacy as you become a knight searching for glory and valor, which is quite an interesting premise in itself. It's a very literal definition of role-playing. Like, it's not a D&D fantasy sort of thing where everything's all smiles and rainbows because it's all fantasy and magic and goblins and elves and things. Now, those things may exist within Arthurian legend, sort of, maybe, perhaps, and yes, very clearly, this is a very vibrant and colourful game, but it's very much stripped back in the whole magic and fantasy feel. Like, magic is sort of revered to witches and wizards and sort of things. It's a very separate from the main body of the game, where you are, for the most part, playing knights. So let's talk about the rest of the book for just a moment before I try and drop it on the floor. It very much feels like a period piece in of itself, and very much a work of art. Like, it doesn't have like a glossy white magazine finish that you would probably expect with a lot of TTRPg books. It's got sort of a rougher yet smooth feel to it, parchment in colour, and the way that it's divvied up is very reminiscent of what you would find with more medieval styled books and writing. Like, subtitles have got like a ye old gothic feel to them, and images like this one here. It's not the best quality in the world. I don't have the PDF, so I can't bring it up to show you. Like, it's not the best image in the world, but it certainly invoked the style that it's going for, like the Arthurian legend medieval setting. It really does pull you into the sort of world that it's going for. It's just filled with so much vibrance and colour that it does really pull you into the more uplifting, happy cheese fest that is the Arthurian legend, rather than the sick and the grime and the pestilence and the lack of plumbing and all the rest of it that you might find with more modern interpretations of medieval periods and dark ages and all that stuff. It's all for valour, it's for glory, it's all for the name of God and King Arthur, and it's, you're a knight, it's all wonderful, happy, clappy sort of affair, sort of. And I did recommend you watching Excalibur, the 1981 film. It's quite a long film, admittedly, and there are bits where it borderline to sex parody, but if you want a general vibe of what I'm sort of referring to is, go and check out that film, and of course go and watch Monty Python to the Quest for the Holy Grail, because that's just fucking hilarious, and it's sort of the same sort of vibe, I guess. But what do you do with Pendragon in terms of its mechanical setting? Well, it's based very much on Chaosium's like basic role-playing system, where you sort of roll beneath the number that you're looking for. Usually with their games, it's percentile dice. But with Pendragon, you're sort of rolling with a d20, which is like the bastion of the TTRPg dice. And the way that it works is that you sort of roll beneath your core tribute. If it's below that, you succeed. And if it's the number of your particular stat, it's a crit. And I believe if it's a 20, you fumble. Unless your attribute is 20, then it adds modifiers to that particular roll. And if you're dueling or combating or in some sort of competitive test with somebody else, you still roll beneath your number, but whoever has the higher number wins. So, for example, let's to use an actual example, if I just go to the character at the back, let us say that you are having a bit of friendly jousting or sword fighting with a fellow knight, and let's say you have a 15 in your sword skill, and so do they, just to make it simple. So if I roll for one person, that's a 7, and the second knight rolls 12, so they both succeeded in that roll, but it's the one with the 12 points that would win, because it was ultimately higher than the one who rolled 7, and if it's a tie, then no real advancement is made, and then damage is calculated by rolling d6s and subtracting armor modifiers and whatnot, which is really a very basic, simple way of doing things. And having this sort of fantasy light, for lack of a better phrase, with the d20, I think is a really nice idea as well. So people who are wanting to play something that's a little different from D&D and then find something like Pendragon, they are immediately recognizing it because it's your d20 and d6s, which is what a lot of older style D&D and fantasy games work on for some time as well. So yeah, really simple rulings basically, and then everything else just sort of like comes off across that, making a character similar for the games of that original 80s and 70s period where you're rolling up the stats quite a lot. A lot of games still do that as well, but I find that today a lot of games use like a point buy system, which is nothing wrong with that at all, and some people might actually prefer that because you have a lot more control about what you do with your character. You have like a set number of points or whatever, and you can distribute them how you please. And I believe Pendragon 6th edition does offer something akin to that, but most of it is generated by doing a dice roll and a slight bit of arithmetic. And I'm a games master that likes to embrace that level of chaos when creating characters anyway, on the few occasions I do decide to be a player character, usually in the form of solo play. And it's fun for me seeing how those random elements of chaos can help inspire backstories and whatnot. And I think doing it with something like Pendragon, when you're playing like descendants of that first character and beyond, and how they can shift and change based on the things that the previous characters have done, that would affect their outcome, and especially if they're the complete inverse or the supporting to what the ascendant was like. I think that's a very interesting thing, and given it's been going for a good 40 years, it's clearly a system that people like and it's very popular, but it's very different in terms of role-playing, like a very literal definition of a role-playing game where you play as a knight. You don't go off and do quests and fighting monsters and level up as such as you would find in a lot of other games and video games. It's sandboxy in that there's, I guess, plenty to do, but you can't just go about and do anything willy-nilly. There is still some semblance of reality that the game world is cemented in, which I kind of like. It's very different and it's unique, and it's been on my mind since obtaining this. I want to say it was June or July, whenever a free RPG day was this year. I went into my local game store and I ran a game of Way of the Apocalypse, and as I had a bit of money to spare, I thought I'd treat myself to a couple of games. This, Fallout, and also the other Pendragon 6th edition book that was available, The Grey Knight, which is a revision of an older campaign. I believe it's a 3rd edition book originally, but again, just the artwork is just absolutely stunning. Really imposing figure on the front, and then you've got this sort of like more subdued fantasy element bit on the back. Now, I haven't ran this, nor have I played it, nor have I played Pendragon, and I'm going to touch a bit more about that in a moment. But I have had a little flick through this, and I do have some semblance of how Pendragon could work, that each session is done year by year, as I said, and they grow older and they mature. Injuries take a long time to heal as you progress through your character, and they end up, as I say, may end up retiring because they just can't fight anymore. So I do have some semblance of an idea with that, although I do have to say, as a little nag, you may hear the little creaking as that opened. I opened all the cellophane off, and then I found that that was all stuck together, so yeah, that's all. That's great, yay. Even with the lovely presentation with all the artwork and the little blue ribbon, it's kind of sort of shits on one's enthusiasm somewhat. Oh, and I forgot to mention, the core book itself has not one but 2 ribbons, which makes it really fucking fancy indeed. Pendragon, like a fair amount of Chaosium materials, really does a fantastic job with its world building. Like, the Pendragon book opens up describing what the environment, the customs, and the beliefs and the behaviours of this period of Britain's history would have been like. Sure, the whole Arthurian legend is all myth and fantasy, but there is those time spans did exist, and people are able to know exactly how things could have played out, and like guesswork was just before or after or whatever. And as a games master who loves doing lots of research and trying to make players feel engrossed with the world to make it their own, Pendragon really does a fantastic job of making players and the games master feel that really confident about being a part of that setting. I love the fact that there's a section that's devoted about playing women knights, and it gives some examples, or at least mentions that it was uncommon, yes, but it was an opportunity that some women had during those periods of history. And it also presents the idea of what happens if you want to play like a lady in court sort of thing, where that puts a very different spin on Pendragon, which also presents a lot of its own spice and drama, and having like a mixed group of that would be very interesting. But going back to the knight things, I love the attempts to try and make it more inclusive. Like, you could follow it as like as traditional as possible, you could bend history a bit more, or you can just throw all caution to the wind and do whatever, because at the end of the day it's a game based on a fictional period of British history, which is a weird sentence to say, but it's nice that bits of inclusion is in there. And it also very briefly touches upon of different faiths there as well, so you could be knights of different parts of the world. It doesn't all have to be white male Christian fanfare sort of a thing. And that sort of leads to my biggest criticism with this book, and it's one that I find exceptionally frustrating, because at the time of the recording, this book feels incomplete. By literal definition of the core rulebook, it does have the core rules of how to play, and it does touch upon the winter phase. But all the bits I talked about, playing by year, and you playing the role of the descendants, I've not really picked up from this book. That's come from doing research about this online and just seeing what people are talking about it on like Reddits and Facebook groups and whatever. Because I was reading through this and I was about halfway through the book. I was like somewhere there-ish in the book, and I was trying to work out, okay, so what as a games master do I actually do? I get it that everyone's knights, and yes, it's Arthurian legends, but what do I do exactly? And as I said, I flicked through that, so there was like a year-by-year thing. But at that point, I didn't know that that was considered the default manner of playing Arthurian tales with Pendragon. Because you also have Paladin, which is focused on France, and it focuses on more Charlemagne. I think it's a different period in history as well, but don't quote me on that. So I didn't really know what to do with it, and I was just flicking through the core rulebook to try and find like the Games Master chapter or any bit of advice at all, and I couldn't find anything. And I thought, do I have a dud book? And I know that sounds a bit weird, like, given how chunky it is, it would be a bit hard to miss out information on there, but I own a copy of Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition, and literally there are pages missing out of that book. They're all at the end, admittedly, but I still have an incomplete book, and like printing errors can happen. A friend of mine has also got a copy of that book, and their whole powers that are missing, and they didn't realise this until fairly recently when we were just chatting about it casually. So it was possible that that could have happened, and then I had a look online, and it turns out that no, this was actually advertised initially as the Player's Handbook, and Chaosium earlier this morning on the 13th of December, I saw on Blue Sky, the Games Master book is coming out in 2025. There isn't an exact date yet, which is actually what actually inspired me to talk about this a bit more, because this came out April 2024 and the starter set came out before then, and it really bugs me that people who've bought this, like myself, thinking they could run the full game with this and all the nuts and bolts and the themes and the sort of like year by year thing that I mentioned, there's this big old source book called the Great Pendragon the Great Pendragon Campaign, where it literally goes through year by year the things that happen, and then the players can play through that, or you can take snippets from it, where they can shape and mould the Arthurian legend around them as things happen in front of them and off screen, and they can react to all of that through the various descendants, which actually again sounds really cool, and it takes a few years to play through the whole thing if that's what you want to do. But I have found all of that out through additional research. None of that is present in the book. In fact, it constantly references the Games Master screen and then 2 other books here, and one of them's about making knights that aren't British white Christian males, which I will touch upon in just a moment. But it's a bit frustrating at the moment that I have this core rule book and it's referencing things that don't exist. Like, you sort of opened the door for more rules and opportunities, and no one can get hold of them at the moment. And it'll come to a point in 2025 and beyond where someone's going to find this and all of this seems like a moot point. And I've touched upon all of this before, one of my reviews for Vampire the Masquerade, the Camarilla 5th edition source book, The Fall of London, and I think some of the Chicago by Night books as well, the main book and the spin-offs from that, where it teases and hints about future materials that the developers of that, Onyx Path Publishing, were working for. And yes, whilst in those books you could argue it was more in-world metaplot and world building that built intrigue and ultimately a bit of advertising of what was going to come, but it was still frustrating to see that you've presented in those books like these playable vampire clans and these cults and factions that I can interact with, and yet I'm missing pieces here. You know, it's just I think that's just a little bit shitty, if I'm being totally honest, that I have what's essentially a very large player's guide and I can't really do anything with it, which is super frustrating. And as I mentioned before about the whole thing with inclusivity, with, you know, the women's nights and the different faiths and whatnot, yeah, on the surface, Pendragon is a game where it's a historical piece. You're in Britain, you are playing Arthurian knights, so you're all Christian and most of you are male, which by default, as it is, it's kind of okay if you're playing it as historically as possible, and some people may really enjoy that, and that's absolutely fine. Some people want to break the rules a bit more and bend things and pull things from history that gives them some legitimacy to play a woman knight, which again is absolutely fine, or throw away gender altogether and, you know, have frozen pronouns in there. That's absolutely fine because, you know, those concepts have been around for loads and loads of years now. And it teases knights of different faiths and beliefs and said, oh, for more information, go and read this book that doesn't exist yet. And it's like, you've opened the door for inclusivity to, you know, not to make your game not so black and white. Admittedly, it's mostly white, but you sort of have the door ajar, just sort of peeking your eye through a little bit, and I think that is also a little bit crappy. Like, I don't think there was any real reason why those elements couldn't have been included in this book as well, because as I mentioned, the whole parchment film, the whole lines and dividers, like, some of that information, like, is left off in, like, these bits here, like a smaller bluish font, I believe it is. Oh no, it's not blue, it's sort of like that orangey colour that some of the rest of the book goes on. Or you could have had like a part of a chapter for it, where it doesn't take up so much information. It could be like different parts of Europe or India or whatever. That could have just highlighted a few things and then make these little modifications to character creation if that's the route that you want to go with that. And of course, there's also the option of bringing in older source books that did cover this already. And as with all of Chaosium stuff, it's backwards compatible, and there's a little conversion chart where you want to pull the old stuff into the new. But for somebody who's coming into it new, such as myself, that is a lot of work to have to do, you know, just to make this a full, complete package. And I just feel it's a bit annoying that that wasn't included in here. Like, again, like, the whole themes and the Games Master bit I can understand. If you want to expand that into a fuller book, fair enough. Like, Games Master Guides have been around for a long, long time. I don't feel I can run this as is. I mean, I could use older material and bring forward that, and again, spend a lot of time with the whole conversion stuff, but that's a lot of work. And I know it's a popular thing for a lot of younger, more inexperienced TTRPg people to mod systems till they break, until they're unrecognizable beasts. I mean, you see that a lot with D&D stuff. Like, there's a whole meme when the Cyberpunk Edge Runners anime came out, how to play such and such character in Dungeons and Dragons, when this fucking Cyberpunk TTRPG exists, you know? But that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I'd much rather just go back and play the older material, where I know all that stuff works and I can have that complete package. Which is what I'm going to do once Christmas is gone. I am going to buy 5.2, the Great Pendragon campaign of the Book of Uther, which sort of expands the whole campaign by a few years to take in consideration King Uther's reign, which is a very different feel to King Arthur, where it's all glory and valour and whatnot. King Uther's like every man and woman for himself sort of thing, because he was not a very pleasant individual. But it's really disappointing, because I love how unique Pendragon is. I love recognisable is at the same time, you know, the things with the dice and the mechanics I mentioned earlier on, how it takes the revision, it takes the basic role-playing system, and it just changes one dice to make it recognisable with more fantasy themes, but it still feels like a unique beast. And it still feels like its own unique system. And it's actually me doing this review where I realised that, holy shit, it's like that's really clever. You know, it's another reason why I should waffle away more often rather than not rely on scripts so frequently. And I really want to play this. I really want to put some friends of mine through this, because I was telling them about it and they seem really keen about it. And there's a whole like micromanagement element, like looking after lands and family and whatnot, and all those little bits and pieces that's done through those different phases. And the winter phases happens here, where a lot of that downtime stuff happens. But it's sort of... when I got to that bit, I felt I was missing bits of the book already, and it's just... I can't put my players through that because it feels incomplete. So if I do so, I'm just going to buy the older material and try them out instead. And hopefully by 2026, when the Games Master Guide and those other two books come out, I will be able to play 6th edition, and then hopefully come back here with a proper review, all scripted out and everything, and properly talk about it. Because, as I said, it's a gorgeous book, it's a wonderful system, and it has a really unique setting piece, where it could have been like really childish and fantasy-like, it actually takes the setting really seriously. And Greg Stafford, his passion really comes through with all of the writing that's here. And I love that. As I just said, it feels incomplete. And the Arthurian legend is semi-important to me. Like, I grew up watching Merlin. Not the BBC series, but it was like a short film TV series thing. It had Sam Neill play the role of Merlin. It was the Arthurian legend told through the eyes of Merlin. And that was like a very important show to me. And reading bits about this sort of like inspire the like kid-like wonder again of being like knights and questing for glory sort of thing. And I even touched upon like the main mechanics of the glory in the Valor. Like, it sort of takes away some of that agency in terms of role-playing, where you're trying to describe, or you're in a situation that would cause certain characteristic values of yours to be tested, and you have to do a roll, and if you pass, you act in a certain way or not. Which I really like, because that element of randomness and like certain emotions just getting the better of you, depending on the character, whether they're noble or villainous or things like that. Because, again, it just sort of emphasises you are playing the role of a knight, and yet it feels very engaging, and I just want to be able to play this brand new 6th edition game, but I can't, because I feel that the things are missing. Which is why that I say that Pendragon 6th edition at this time of recording is a flawed masterpiece that really needs those other books as soon as possible. Also, the division of a year between like this book coming out and then the Games Master book coming out is a bit fucking silly. Like, fairly recently you had Chaosium announce and release their Cthulhu by Gaslight books, which is the Victorian Age setting for it. I believe it was the Player's Guide, the Investigator's Guide, that came out in Gen Con, and then the Games Master one's coming out fairly soon. Obviously, Call of Cthulhu is the bigger priority for them, because that's the cash cow for Chaosium. But it would be nice if the Pendragon stuff was like treated with the same level of enthusiasm. Also, there's also, again, the name of the court being at the core rulebook. Like, I don't know why they made the change from the player's handbook to the core rulebook, because this is very clearly a player's handbook. And I heard somebody say that it was because something that Wizards of the Coast got involved or something, which I really hope isn't true, and I would find that fucking bizarre if they would find the means to fucking copyright that. But if that's the case, why couldn't they call it the Knight's Handbook? Like, at least then, you mean, with the same cover, it's like, okay, this is Pendragon, Knight, oh, is this to do with, like, Arthurian legend sort of thing? And you turn back and it tells you everything that you need to know. Like, Pendragon is set amidst the glory and grandeur of King Arthur's Britain. Oh, okay, so this is the player's handbook. Oh, cool. But it doesn't do that. It's very misleading, and I feel that I've wasted quite a bit of money with some books that I can't even run. I mean, I suppose I could run, you know, the Grey Knight and get a semblance of what's going on, but until I get a better understanding about how all of that works, I don't feel particularly comfortable doing that, because, as I said, I'm missing the core elements that are not in the core book. Running the game and invoking that sense of grandeur and the glory, and also the whimsical fantasy of Arthurian legend. So yeah, I do intend of covering more of Pendragon in the future. I'm not going to do like a fucking post-by-post update sort of thing, but I just wanted to talk about Pendragon. I wanted to do it for a while, and I thought, fuck it, you know, just fuck it, why not? So I'd love to hear a bit more about what you lot think about Pendragon. Like, have you tried using 6th edition at your tables, or are you like me and haven't touched it or been highly disappointed because it feels incomplete? What's your favourite edition of Pendragon if you've been playing for a while? I've heard that 4th edition is really popular because it has more variety in character creation. Like, you can play wizards, and it does introduce, like, within its systems, like, other forms of knights and warriors, like Saxons and different faiths and whatnot. Sorry if I'm being vague with this, but I'm not all too familiar with Pendragon, and I just want to learn more, and it would have been really fucking nice if 6th edition would have fucking done that. So yeah, let me know about all things Pendragon in the description below, and I'm actually going to give a list of a whole sort of assortment of books that you can purchase on DriveThruRPG from 6th edition to 1st edition. Basically, if it's a Pendragon book, I'm going to put it in the description for you to go and purchase. Now, if you purchase them with those specific links, I get some of the money back because I'm an affiliate on DriveThruRPG, so I'm able to provide more off-the-cuff things like this and the more usual horror-focused TTRPG elements that I usually do. And, you know, buying these books, both from DriveThruRPG and elsewhere, isn't a particularly cheap venture, as I'm sure you know, because I prefer to have things physical. So any little financial support that you can give would help. It goes a long way, even with the little slivers that I get from that cut. But if you can't, that's absolutely fine. I've got no grudges against that, because, you know, times is hard and all of that, and also Christmas is right around the fucking corner. But what you can do to help is like, share and subscribe this video with any and all who would enjoy what I do, and I will see you on the next upload, wherever that may well be for you. And until next time, farewell.